Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Willie, and today I'm going to be taking a look back at the new class of Mists of Pandaria and answering a very simple question. Was it any good though? And here's what points I'll be looking at. The leveling experience, how good they were at it and how fast they could level. The class quests, what they were and how well they fit. The PvE dungeon and raid performance. PvP, be it open world battlegrounds or arenas. And finally, the tier sets they had throughout the duration of Mists of Pandaria, the effects they had for each specialisation, as well as their looks. Monks were the second class to be added to World of Warcraft on the 4th expansion in. Keeping with the theme of odd-numbered expansion gives us new race, even number gives us a new class, as we'd seen so far. Except this time, we were lucky enough to get a neutral race to go with this new class. Monks were really a logical fit to an expansion heavily themed around Eastern culture, especially China. And when you think monk, you think some guy in a robe of some variety sitting out in a monastery. You think physical prowess with bare-handed attacks and some form of spiritual nature, and that's pretty much what we got with the monk, down to the letter. And Blizzard already had a very prominent monk figure in one of their games, which I am of course talking about Diablo, and if there is one thing Blizzard likes to do is take inspiration from one game and use it in others, hence there being the Warcraft universe spanning 4 different types of game. But strangely enough, there isn't a huge correlation between the two in how they play and what abilities they use, beyond what you could just expect from any game designer trying to put together something to embody a monk. In fact, more inspiration seemed to be drawn from movies and different monk archetypes. Brewmaster dodging and weaving like a drunken master from martial arts flicks, Windwalker, the Kung Fu master, and Mistweaver, the wise old man, who still has an edge in combat. In fact, early on, Blizz were considering Brewmaster as the new class, not just a specialisation. We can also see the hesitance to add something new again. Ghostcrawler called Death Knights disruptive, which they absolutely were, mainly because they released being so over the top power level. Monk's release was comparatively lukewarm at best. Not only did they start at level 1, but any advantage you got in PvP or PvE was mainly just other people not understanding what your class was capable of. With Death Knights, you picked a Death Knight and then you won. It was simple as that, they were straight up overpowered. Monks were always to be associated with Pandaren as well, which didn't exactly go down as overly popular. Still to this day, Pandaren and monks are some of the least represented race and classes in the game, which is a shame because the fantasy of the monk has so much potential to be super cool. When I think monk, I think fast, agile, powerful, melee focused, being able to take a hit while standing their ground, and I do think they delivered to that end to an extent, but I think with the looming legacy of balancing the Death Knight, it given Blizzard a bad case of once bitten, twice shy. With that out of the way, let's actually talk about the leveling, shall we? As mentioned earlier, monks start at level 1 on their own unique starting zone, the Wandering Isle, which is basically a big old turtle. Interestingly, they also started as neutral, and throughout the duration of their starter quests, they see both the good and bad sides of the Alliance and the Horde, and have to make their decision which faction to follow moving forwards. And sort of like the Death Knight, they were equipped with a decent set of items after leaving their starting zone before they made their journey to the mainland, but nothing on the same power level as Death Knights. In fact, by this point, leveling had sort of changed for good really. Honestly, it's not much of a consideration as it used to be. We had heirlooms by this point, which sort of invalidated much of the power game through leveling, as you could just tear through content with straight up overpowered gear. Even without them though, it wasn't really much of a challenge at all. Add on top of this the fact that LFG was the thing, as well as professions, rare mobs, PvP, and pet battles all granted XP by this point. Leveling was more tailored to what you enjoyed doing as a player, rather than solely good or worse depending on your class. The one other thing I can say is that this would have been the first time players had leveled something under this new talent and spell system, where you gained 1 talent per 15 levels, and spells and abilities are automatically learned, as you don't have to go back and pick up ranks anymore. And Monk's spellbook was pretty bare to be honest as she started off, and overall quite slow paced, and this was the case for everyone though. In many ways I can't really comment too much on monks specifically leveling, because I just think the changes made in Mists of Pandaria just made it a very similar experience across the board for every single class, and once you got to the end game there was fun to be had there, but this long grind of not a lot happening across every class was really a fault of Mists of Pandaria overall, so we'll move on. Next up, the class quests. Well, apart from the starter zone, monks actually had regular class quests to go back and see. These were mostly available every 10 levels or so, and took you back to the Peak of Serenity, located in Conlai Summit. You had an easy way to get back there Crusade pilgrimage. And these quests were very fitting for the monk. I enjoyed the flavour of them. They were all about completing various challenges, usually in some form of 1v1 battle against different master type NPCs. Nothing too taxing, but as for the monk fantasy, taking on different masters as you advance is exactly the kind of thing that you would expect. The rewards for these quests were often belts as well, just like how you wear different belts to show experience in many forms of martial arts. You got a green belt at 40, a red one at 60 and a brown at 70. I'm guessing this is similar to progression in some form of martial arts. Maybe one of you guys knows more about that than I do. Other than this, you got weapons. You also gained access to a nice mastery buff for an hour called Enlightenment, and you could return to the Peak of Serenity to complete these challenges again as daily quests to get the buff back as well, which would boost up your performance a nice bit when questing shortly after. This was the first time since vanilla really when so much content was put into class quests. Well, it would be until Legion at least, when Blizzard went crazy with class specific content, but we'll get there in time. PvE, let's get into the interesting stuff. Monks were changed and iterated on so many times throughout Mists of Pandaria's testing phases. At one point they had light and dark orbs, like two types of different combo points that they built up and then spent on abilities. In the end, this was simplified down to just chi, which are basically the same as combo points for all intents and purposes, as well as having an energy bar as a primary resource, just like rogues really. This went for Brewmaster and Windwalker. Mistweaver had a mana bar and chi. How do you go from energy to mana bar though? Good question. Monks launch with stances, just like how warriors have them. There was Fierce Tiger for DPS, which increased resource generated as well as movement speed and just overall flat damage. Sturdy Ox for Brewmaster. Remember, monks wear leather and don't have shields, so this tank had both damage reduction and more stamina built in to smooth damage, as well as stagger, causing 20% of damage to be taken over 10 seconds and could be increased through mastery. Finally, Wise Serpent for healing. Blizzard wanted monk healing to be something completely new to your standard healer playstyle of stand back and make sure the health bars are green, sort of like how Discipline priests had atonement but they were ranged. And the idea for monks was to be able to provide heals while also putting in some DPS as a melee class. And as you can see here, this stance granted a whopping amount of stats to allow you to perform in this role. Because monks required so many stats to heal and DPS, it's kind of like looking at Druid loot back in Classic, it's just all over the place. And they were actually tuned down early as their damage was a bit on the high end. Let's take a deeper look at each specialization now and how it played back then. First things first that I have to emphasize is that each class had one talent tree for all specializations. How exactly Blizzard made classes so good with one talent tree is still a bit of a mystery to me today. I guess quantity doesn't translate to quality, and just so you know, these will be as monks were from later patches in Mists of Pandaria. They underwent so many changes from beta to 5.4. Much of the class was changed completely. For example, this is an early press release of some of the monks' abilities, talents and masteries, and some of this stuff looks familiar, but works a great deal differently, or was just straight up changed later on. Just as a comparison to what I'll talk about with each specialization in a moment, every single mastery was changed. Almost every ability was modified. They had some abilities that required certain weapon types. Fortifying Ale actually looks like the worst cooldown I've ever seen, but it could have been interesting if you could click it off though. Roll cost 50 energy. 50, imagine that. Oh, and most of the talents were changed too. If I went through all of the changes here, it would just go on forever and ever and would just be a changelog slideshow, so I think this gives you an idea of what they were like without me doing that. Also, before we go on to specializations, I'd like to talk about talents first, because usually I'd talk about specializations and then do talents, but in Mists of Pandaria, as just mentioned, we've got one talent tree for all specs, so I'll just kind of be repeating the same things I talked about for each spec. Now, there are certain talents which were objectively better for certain specializations, and I'll highlight them as we go into more detail, but just for now I want to do a quick rundown of the talent trees. Level 15 talents were all about mobility. Momentum was usually the go-to as it provided a lot of mobility in fights. If you needed to break a route, Tiger's Lust worked great. Level 30 was damage and healing. Chi Wave was often the most popular. It was instant cast and smart casted heals to find the lowest health targets. Chi Burst was good for burst, I guess, when it could be lined up. Sphere wasn't really taken. Level 45 was resource generation improvement. All of the things are good here for all specializations really. Chi Brew was especially nice for burst from the likes of Windwalkers or Mistweavers. Ascension was just a very nice passive increase. 60 is about crowd control. Ring of Peace isn't the one you know today, but it's still strong, but not as strong. It disarmed and silenced mobs around you for 4 seconds and lasted 8 seconds. Oxwave was just usually outshone by Leg Sweep 9 times out of 10. Monks very rarely had difficulty getting into melee range with all their mobility ability. Level 75 is the defensive tier. Healing elixirs was a nice passive heal, scaled well with specializations that needed more brews like Mistweaver or Brewmaster. Dampen Harm was usually taken for non-tank specializations, as Stagger had Brewmaster covered for massive damage. Diffuse magic was only on a 1-minute cooldown and was very powerful, usually the go-to on any magic damage. Finally, level 90 improved Ruput somehow. Rushing Jade Wind was used for BM or Windwalker, usually on high AoE situations, replacing Spinning Crane Kick. Zuin was more for cleave or single target. He also procced Mistweaver's Eminence, meaning 25% of his damage healed the lowest nearby player. Chi Torpedo was pretty much only used by Mistweaver. It was part of what made them so fun, and went very nicely with Celerity for that extra roll charge. Zooming through your entire raid and doing great healing for 0 mana, what a fantastic ability combo that was. With that said, onto the specializations themselves. Windwalker, the melee DPS specialization. Its mastery was Bottled Fury. When you generate a charge of Tiger's Eye Brew, you have a 20% chance to get another. What's Tiger's Eye Brew? It's this. It basically boils down to when you spend chi, you get stacks of brew. Each stack of brew when used increases damage by 6%. You can store up to 20, but only use 10. So 60% damage buff, maximum for 15 seconds. Sounds good, but required spending 40 chi to get all that. That's a lot of combo points to build up essentially, and this was the real crux of good Windwalker Monk DPS. You really had to know the fight you're going into inside out. What timings are there? When can you hit the boss? Does it take any extra damage at any point? Does it ever go immune? How many times can I align my cooldowns with my Tiger's Eye buff? It made for an interesting playstyle and required foresight and planning ahead to really smash the DPS meters. At the same time, it was a bit of a curse. 60% damage is massive, but the ramp up time was so long. On many fights you go in using your cooldowns right away. On the Monk you have the choice of using cooldowns that you know are far weaker than they can be, or holding on to them until you have enough stacks of brew. It kind of felt bad both ways, and no, you couldn't build up 20 stacks before the start of a fight. Ability wise, it's amazing how little monks have changed in so long. They still had jab, Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Rising Sun Kick, and Fists of Fury. Talents would vary on what you needed. The key ones that were swapped out depended on how many targets your fight had. Single target, you might want something like this. Heavy AoE, well, how about this instead? Playstyle wise, honestly, it's much like it is today. Builder, spender type of gameplay, with the added bonuses from Tiger's Eye Brew of course. Windwalker also had Touch of Death and Storm, Earth and Fire as cooldowns, and they were generally good single target with strong burst cleave DPS. Next up, Brewmaster, the new tanking specialization for Mists of Pandaria. Your mastery just increased your stagger percentage and attack power. A tank designed to embody the new mantra surrounding tanks in Mist, which was active mitigation. This means tanks have more ability to prepare and react to damage incoming and aren't just big bags of health that get hit and then heals have to heal them. Brewmaster training did much to change up their abilities to fit this. A good Brewmaster was tracking many things all at once, and they were so fun to manage. You had to keep track of your stagger, purifying brew stacks that cleanse stagger, elusive brew which gave 30% dodge and was generated by auto attack crits, keep up shuffle via blackout kick every 6 seconds, as well as having fortifying brew, nimble brew, zen meditation, avert harm, and guard as cooldowns. Brewmasters were like a juggling act. You really needed to keep up all of these buffs as well as managing your stagger, and they got no bonus armor increase from talents or passive abilities and really relied on good active mitigation management. You drop that active mitigation for a few seconds, it could be fatal. Nimble brew was often a lifesaver, more so than anything else. A CC effect on a Brewmaster could see them go splat in a few seconds flat. This playstyle of keeping so many things going at once was totally unique. Sure, other tanks had active mitigation implemented like Shield of the Righteous, Shield Block, Death Strike, but they were quite a bit more basic. The Brewmaster monks were like playing 4D chess in comparison. As for important talents, healing elixirs was really great since you're drinking a whole lot of brew. You are a Brewmaster after all, right? But for the most part, your baseline kit just had so much stuff to use and upkeep that talents kind of took a backseat to the crazy playstyle of the Brewmaster. Finally, the Mistweaver, or Fistweaver should I say, their mastery causing healing spheres to spawn near allies. A new healing specialization aimed to be able to put out some damage on top of the heals, and this was mainly done through Eminence as shown here. Your heals and damage were split between mana and chi expenditure, and we pretty much had all the abilities that still exist today for Mistweavers, except Uplift and Enveloping Mist cost 2 chi. Mistweaver also had a nice paragraph long list of ability modifications. These boiled down to your damage abilities amplifies your healing in some way. And there was also this as well, muscle memory added in later on. I remember looking at Mistweaver for the first time in Mists of Pandaria Pandaria and thinking, what on earth am I looking at? And I'm getting it all over again now. There is a lot to take in with this specialization, and a huge amount of depth to buff upkeep, mana management, and cooldown usage. What a fantastic time to be playing a healer. Mistweaver also had to have a cheeky little drink throughout the duration of a fight, except they liked a nice cup of tea. Mana tea, that is. Spend chi, get stacks, use them to restore mana. It was kind of funny seeing a panda having a nice sip on some tea midway through a fight. It kind of characterized their somewhat whimsical nature very nicely. Mistweaver playstyle revolved around renewing Mist, a heal over time that jumped from player to player. Your goal was to prepare for high burst damage by getting as many renewing Mists as possible out and extending them with Thunder Focus Tea, and then blasting as many uplift casts as possible. It was kind of RNG and setup heavy, and to be honest, Discipline Priest could stop any damage in its tracks usually, which wasn't the fault of the poor Mistweaver. All the same, there was a day and night difference between a top tier and a new Mistweaver, and that kind of difference shows that class design rewards a good player as it should be. They had some cooldowns too, of course. Historically though, Mistweaver cooldowns have always been on the weak side. Revival is a nice instant heal and dispels everything apart from curses. Life Cocoon is their single target cooldown, a big absorb, and increases the effect of heal over times by 50%. By the end of Mists of Pandaria, each monk specialization had worked its way into its niche, and all three were so unique, especially with their playstyle that was more or less GCD locked for them. They played fast and needed a good player piloting them to get the best out of them, and looking back at them now, it's hard not to wish we had this level of depth and involvement in class design anymore. Can always be hopeful for Shadowlands, I guess. On to PvP now. Brewmaster was sort of a thing early on until Vengeance got nerfed from player damage because it kind of made them invincible and was like hitting a cactus, except the more you hit them, the harder they hit you back. Mistweaver, by the end of the expansion, were in a solid state. Having a number of strong cooldowns, they were good performers in Arena as well, on top of having Roll, Thunder Focus Tea as a silence immune and strong cooldowns, and above all the Healing Sphere spam to prepare for damage, which healed a lot on the move whilst costing almost no mana. Oh, and don't forget about Paralyze as well, which could be glyphed to be ranged as an instant cast CC. It made setups in Arena very easy to pull off. In rated battlegrounds they would also perform well, just being hard to pin down due to their sheer mobility as well as providing very strong heals. The main issue was the fact that monks could burn through their mana bar in no time at all if they were unable to take advantage of their healing over time effects, as well as needing their downtime to make sure they're keeping their stacks of mana tea being used up. As for Windwalker, they were basically the equivalent of Demon Hunters now in retail, pretty much unpeelable. Their kit made them extremely difficult to tie down. Between Roll, Flying Serpent Kick, Self-Heals, Transcendence, Nimble Brew and Tiger's Lust, and the PvP trinket, a monk could pick a target and sit on them all day. On top of having a hard CC and an AoE stun, yeah, monks were pretty solid. In fact, their only issue was getting bursted out super fast, because at the end of the day, you're still wearing leather. Oh, and did I forget to mention Rising Sun Kick was a 25% mortal strike effect back then too, made them even more of an annoyance for the enemy healer. PvP as a whole was in a great state back then, a lot of reactive play, and mistakes were punishable very quickly at high levels of play. Okay, let's have a quick look at some of the tier sets. So by Mists of Pandaria, as well as the few previous expansions, each class had a different tier set for each specialization. They looked slightly different between LFR, Normal and Heroic, but the bonuses were the same. Also, as it had been for quite a while, there were 5 tier pieces, but each one had a 2 and a 4 set. Tier 14 was the Red Crane set from Terrace of Eternal Spring and Heart of Fear. Actually, my favourite version of this is the LFR set. It's what I still use on my monk today. The coloration looks really good, and it goes well with the artifact weapons from Legion too. Windwalker first, I'll link Energizing Brew here, don't think I've mentioned it yet, monks just have so many cooldowns it's crazy. So this is just some extra cooldowns, not bad. Fist of Fury is your big hitter, some more of that is always nice. Brewmaster gets extra defensive bonuses, more dodge is always welcome, and 20% extra on guard is a sizable amount. Finally Mistweaver, standard stuff, functional, not too exciting. Best thing about the set is the transwog for me though. Tier 15 is where things get way more interesting and actually affect gameplay. This set is from Throne of Thunder. Windwalker's generators can spawn an orb that gives energy. This actively incentivizes awareness around you, and you can collect up a nice little ball of orbs to all use at once for a burst, a very interesting set bonus. The 4 set, more damage on Tiger's Eye Brew, up to 5% extra, pretty minor buff, but it's something a track. Brewmaster, 2 set, more stagger from Elusive Brew, very nice and scales with its usage as well, promoting careful management of your various Brewmaster abilities, big fan of this. The 4 set, a chance for stagger damage to make Purifying Brew, which clears stagger, costs no chi. Great ability synergy, allows chi to be spent keeping your other active mitigation up instead. Once again, very cool bonus. Mistweaver, bonus also works well together. The 2 set making Renewing Mist start to gain power as it travels. 4 set reduce cooldown on Thunder Focus Tea, which can extend the duration of Renewing Mist. Also the set looks good, bit similar to Tier 14, Honestly, not as big a fan of it as 14, still looks decent though. Finally, tier 16 from Siege of Orgrimmar. Windwalker combo breaker gets more damage, here's what it does baseline, nice extra burst effect to consider with your Tiger's Eye Brew. The 4 set honestly is pretty lackluster, 10 Tiger's Eye Brew costs 40 chi to generate for 1 reduction. Brewmaster, Black Ox statue auto shields raid members every time you do a certain amount of damage by default, so do more damage, get more shields, nice. The 4 set heals from Purifying Brew, kind of rewards going high stagger, very powerful effect, especially when combined with Healing Brews. Mistweaver, Gifted Serpent is your mastery and will go off passively, so this isn't dead weight and should be pretty much close to a permanent shield on you, very nice. The 4 set rewards you for good renewing misplay, once again, very good. As for looks, I don't know whether it's just me, but does the heroic set pretty much always look the worst in Pandaria? Never been too much of a fan of the face guard type armor sets as well, at least for non-play anyway. Monks, for all the barriers that they faced in terms of people not giving them a chance, ended up being a very unique class, and amidst the brilliance of class design in Mists of Pandaria, they certainly found their place. Honestly, looking back at MoP, maybe monks never quite received the appreciation that they deserved. More or less everyone was having a great time on their class. The fact that the monk was very much up there in terms of design feels like it got a bit overlooked. Also, it's undoubtable that despite being awesome, starting at level 1 made people a bit less interested to give them a try. On top of the fact they weren't known to be crazy overpowered as Death Knights were on release, it's a tough situation to be in. So the monk in Mists of Pandaria, was it any good though? Yes, it was. Really good in fact, completely unique, and quite frankly, overlooked. If Monk, as it was in Mists of Pandaria, was introduced in Shadowlands, people would be losing it with how good this class is. The fact of the matter in Mists of Pandaria is, I see it like this. The Monk was like having a nice juicy steak, design-wise, but so was every other class. Why do I want that steak when I've already got this one in front of me? In BFA today, classes are like a hot dog, which will keep some people happy, but so many more people would want to give that steak a go instead. I think that made sense. There we have it, the Monk, a victim of success who has never quite made a full recovery into widespread popularity beyond the occasional flavour of the month re-rolling. How do you guys remember the Monk? Any thoughts? Hit me up below. As always, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.